So we're up to 2015 in our journey here. We're going from what I used to do in a past life, how I got into agriculture, and then year by year how I've grown my farm and the issues that I'm having now, and looking back not just on the successes that I've had through the last couple of years, but these videos have been more focused on where I see my failings have been and how I want to change them going forward. This whole series is all about you shortening your learning curve and getting better and not making the same mistakes that I made when I was starting my farm. So let's get into 2015. We're going to talk first about what the farm was and where the farm was at, and then we're going to talk about employees, interpersonal stress, how dealing with other human beings is sometimes the most difficult and taxing thing you can do on a farm or any small business. So 2015, our production was much like it was in 2016 and 17, where we had scaled broilers back to about 1,300 birds. We did 20 pigs that year, raising them from piglets, getting feeder pigs in. We had an 1.5 acre hop yard. We had an 1.5 acre apple orchard. We have a small vegetable operation, and then all this land and property and stuff to manage. Also, our brewery opened up this year, and we did hand bottling, and it was a whole mess having a brewery. But that's a whole different story. Part of the business nonetheless, but yeah, different story. So the farm operationally, what were the operations we were doing in 2015? We had about 1,500 broilers, 1,500, 1,300 in that range of birds for meat that we're raising out in chicken tractors. We did them in batches of 240. And then as we rotated them out, we had new chicks rotating in, and I would process the birds, and we sold them through a CSA, a farmer's market, and a few small wholesale accounts, and that's how we got rid of all those chickens that year. We also had 20 pigs, 20. Those 20 pigs, pretty easy to manage when they're piglets. It got a little crazy when they were bigger. They ate a lot, definitely needed more feeder space by the end of the year. But learning and growing from 12 pigs the year before, I went from 12 to 20 as I kind of was planning on jumping up through the years. Then we had the 1.5 acres of hops and the 1.5 acres of apples. That those hops and apples weren't going to make the farm any money, but they were kind of connected to the fact that we have a brewery and a distillery. So that in itself could have been a full-time job for 2 people if it was done well, because plants don't scream very loud when you don't take care of them, or they don't break through a fence and get out when they're hungry. They would get a little neglected as I tried to grow the chickens and pigs and vegetables, more chickens and pigs and the birds for eggs. So because those were more profit driven, those would make the farm money that would contribute to our overall costs, where the other ones was just a sunk cost. And I just didn't allocate enough time and energy and resources to those operations to grow them properly throughout the years. But again, I was saddled with both budget restrictions of like how much and expectations for how much I was supposed to produce, and then these operations that aren't well suited for our area, but are tying in the whole business together. So it was weird and complicated and difficult to manage. So we had the apple orchard and the hop yard. Then we did about 1/8 of an acre of vegetables because everybody loved vegetables here. The apprentices, the farm hands, not apprentices, the farm hands that I hired that year, really into growing vegetables and really enthusiastic about it. I thought we could manage a small vegetable garden on top of everything else, which was a foolish dream of mine. So we had vegetables, hops, apples, chickens for eggs, chickens for meat, and then pigs. And then our brewery opened up that year. That was the first year we started producing beer, and that was a whole nother animal, and I'm part of those conversations as well. So I not only had to wrap my mind around in managing my employees, managing the farm, but then our brewery got going, our distillery was producing, and there was just a lot of stuff going on. It was really, really crazy. Looking back at it now, it was just an insane year. I'll detail this out a little bit more in the blog post that goes with this video. It's in the link is in the show notes for this. But yeah, so operationally, again, took a bit off more than I could chew. Thought that I could do it. Thought if I just put in a little more hours, thought if I worked a little bit harder, I could do it. And man, that was tough. Part of that tough part was staffing. So if you look at your staff or the people working for you or with you, whether they're volunteers, woofers, farmhands, apprentices, interns, they're best suited to fit within your system, not help you create it. You have to have your head wrapped completely around what you're doing. Otherwise, it's very hard to delegate, because you can never expect somebody to do something as good as you're going to be able to do it on your farm. Just not everybody's going to be as invested as you are, and you have to take into that account that you may only get 60, 70, 80, maybe 90% out of that person. But at the end of the day, that's a 9-to-5 job for them. They're going to go home because it's not their, complete life. And it's tough to expect that from anybody, and if you find those people, hang on to them. They're super valuable. So I was a little disjointed, distracted, and all over the map trying to manage all these different operations, and that is a bad working environment for people who are trying to work with me on the farm, because to teach somebody the routine of what to look for with broilers, how to treat them, how to move things effectively and efficiently, and how to have those systems in place and going, how to then clean eggs and work with egg-laying hens. If you're not comfortable with working with pigs or livestock, trying to get in and work with livestock and cover chores so that Farmer John can have a day off can be difficult, or it can be a challenge, maybe not be something you're completely into. And if your focus is more on plants and you don't get to spend enough time on plants, or if you want to just spend too much time on plants and you don't want to spend time on the livestock, either way, if you think it was hard for me to balance all these operations, trying to wrap somebody who's not in it full-time all the time, year-round, now a couple years invested, trying to have them wrap their mind around an operation that you don't completely understand yourself, which is what I tried to do, is difficult. And that breeds for negative atmosphere, and your staff's work will suffer because of it. Thinking about staffing on farm. So this has always been a tricky subject for me, because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, and some of the missteps that I've had in my staff have been because of my management. It took me a couple years to look back and then see, oh, this screwed up because could have done something better. It's also a flaw in the people combined and compounded by the decisions that I've made. So anything I say here on video is not necessarily pointed directly at anybody who's worked for me, but it's a culmination of years of just thinking about this stuff, going over this stuff, talking to other farmers, looking back on what my experiences were, what my notes, what my photographs were. So none of this stuff, this is my disclaimer, none of this stuff is pointed directly at any particular one person. So first couple minutes of this video, I described how complicated and diverse my farm was, and if I had trouble wrapping my head around the entire thing, imagine then trying to distill that complicated structure down to somebody who is watching it on a YouTube video, or someone who might want to come work for me, someone who might really like this, who is enthusiastic, but then trying to wrap your head around the fact that there are chickens, there are pigs. Those are two different livestock operations. There's two different kinds of chickens that require two different kinds of management between the meat and the eggs. Then you have hops, apples, and vegetables, and then the property too. So there's all these different elements that are at play, and it's all new. It's newer to me, and when I'm new on the property and I'm discovering things and finding out what my resources are, without having had the time to try to set things up and build things on a smaller scale and grow a little bit more sustainably. I jumped in too big too fast, like we talked about in the last video, and then that affects the people who come to the farm who are willing to do the work but have difficulty wrapping their heads around what it is we're doing here or trying to accomplish. And that takes, I'll blame some bad management, some bad decisions on my part, some of my partners, for what we decided we would take on. But at the end of the day, I own all those decisions, and it was my choice, and we all suffered because of what I did. Again, I'm focusing on the negative on these videos to shorten your learning curve. Not all of it was bad. We had some great times. We produced a lot of stuff, blah, 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 blah. So important takeaways that I learned that year were having your systems in place so that you could teach them to other people. So you had a routine, so you knew this is always what happens, this is where this is where that is. And what I found recently, and what I'll be applying to the farm over this last year and then this coming year, are lean management principles, where I'll clean the shop the way I want it and take a picture of it, and then that's the way it's got to look. Or I'll clean something, label it, and it's always got to go back to that clean, labeled, organized place. I didn't have that. I had a lot of stuff where it's like, this all stuff kind of goes in that shed, and this stuff goes in that shed. And not all the sheds were labeled, and all the buildings are red. So it can be very confusing unless you live and work here and have been here for a couple of years to know where everything is. So to have things disorganized, kind of spread out, and in piles versus in racks and shelves and bins was a huge flaw, and then it ate up a lot of time. If I sent somebody to go look for something, it took them extra long to find it. And then when they put it back, if you're putting it back in a pile of stuff, then it just goes into the pile of stuff. And that might be significant to me, but it's not significant to somebody else. And then if somebody finds it and borrows it without me knowing and then puts it somewhere else because it doesn't have a designated home to go to, then there's just strife between all the people because nobody can work effectively because you're disorganized. And that was a flaw with me. I came out of this big farm with this barn full of stuff and sheds full of stuff, and there was garbage and scrap metal and piles of wood and old infrastructure, and we're just changing and updating, and it was like, oh man, it was pure mayhem. So with that disorganization, then employees, if you can't have them working on meaningful work, if you have them frustrated by looking for things, then they're just going to become increasingly frustrated, and it compounds over time. Take that frustration and couple it with the rigors of farm life, of working with livestock, of moving chicken tractors in the heat, of pulling hoses through the field, of digging up vegetables and pulling weeds by hand. All that physical, difficult labor that we all know farming is really hard, coupled with some disorganization and just that strife on a day-to-day, it gets really, really difficult. And as that builds throughout the season, it all comes to a head where you might end up arguing with people, bickering with people. It's in the heat of the season. Things aren't going that well. I'm watching the bottom line, and things aren't going as great as they should because of all these little frustrations along the way. And the more organized you can be, the better. And that is one of the most difficult parts I've learned of farming. 2015 really drove that home, and I've gotten better through the last couple of years, but I feel like I need a year just to kind of focus on getting it organized. What we're doing here, and where does everything go? Where does everything live? No piles of garbage. We're almost to that point now, but without that, it's hard to manage other people working with me, which then means I take on all the tasks, which is where I'm at pretty much today, and I end up doing everything, which is no good because then I burn out because I don't have a day off, and I'm trying to handle a set workload, and then things keep piling up, and it goes bad from there. So now looking back, I didn't realize this at the time, and as we're talking about 2015, so we're at 2017 now, and as I'm doing this kind of like retroactive, hindsight is 2020 journey back in time with you guys as I'm talking about it on YouTube, I realized that disorganization was the key to the strife on farm, where the more disorganized and the more all over the map I was, the tougher it was for me to function, for my staff to function, and for the farm to function. How I would fix that going forward: I've gotten rid of most of the piles of junk on farm. I've gotten rid of a lot of the scrap metal, piles of wood, old fences, old vehicles that just don't work anymore. Getting rid of these things that, even if they're not in your way or they're off to the side, they can be a visual distraction where they're just taking up energy and brain space of like, oh yeah, I gotta make sure I get that truck up on Craigslist, or oh yeah, I gotta make sure I go to the scrap metal yard, or oh, that thing is in that pile of junk and maybe I'll dig it out later. Just clean it all out, get rid of stuff, throw it in dumpsters. Ben Hartman talks about it in The Lean Farm, where they spent time throughout the season getting rid of all unnecessary tools and stuff on farm, and only keep what they need, where they need it, in a labeled, clean, organized space. I'm not there yet. I'm still redefining what my farm is as our brewery has grown, our distillery has grown, and the obligations that have been placed on my shoulders and the farm shoulders have kind of changed and shifted and adapted a little bit through the last couple of years. And as I've learned this piece of land more, there's things that you can do here well, and there's things that you can't do here well, and some of them make sense, some of them don't. And that's what we're talking about in this video series, is what my farm plan is going forward based off of all these things that I've learned in the past. And once I have a solid farm plan, I'll know exactly what tools I need, where everything needs to live, where everything needs to go. I'm going to rethink how I've designed the farm. There's some things that I'm just kind of stuck with, and we're going to have to figure that out. But that's the purpose of this video series, of this blog series, and of what I'm doing going forward in the farm. So at this point, I'd like to know if all of this makes sense to you guys. I know I have my core group of viewers and followers that I've been interacting with, that I've been reading your comments, that people who watch these videos, even though they're a little bit longer. Does all of this make sense so far? Maybe I'll publish some extra videos just kind of talking through some stuff. Just because I'm figuring this out, I'm building this plan going forward. I have these systems to fix some of my problems, but it takes time and energy to fix those problems while I'm still winding up the farm season for the year, and I haven't gotten to the winter yet when I can really focus on this stuff. I haven't I still have the brewery, and that things still break. Like, we just shipped our forklift off, and you know, we're putting like $2,500 worth of brakes and brake system into it because it's old and it needs it. I'm balancing the stress of my day-to-day and the difficulties of my day-to-day tasks with trying to rethink and replan some stuff and fix some problems that we've had on the farm. I want this to be a collaborative project where I can post this information, you guys give me some feedback, or just follow along and learn from what my mistakes. I'm trying to be as honest with myself and with you guys as possible, just because I think farming needs to not make as many beginner mistakes. If we've been at this for 10,000 years and we haven't figured it out yet, there are people who have figured it out. The real trick is taking the case studies of the people who have figured it out and then applying them to your own situation, your own motivations, your own timeline, finances, resources, and that's where the real art, the real difficulty is. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I love sharing this stuff with you guys. It's been a good journey for me. Even if these videos don't get as many views as some of my other videos, they're really good for me to learn and have because it's forcing me to look back and say, what did I do wrong and how can I do it better in the future? And that's, you know, I'm lucky because I always get to wake up tomorrow morning and try again. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Until next time, I will see you out in the field.